Okay, so today we have something really special. I'm going to be showing you guys how to make a really super easy loopable cinematic shield deflect animation. This is going to be covering some geometry node stuff, some rigid body physics, but all at a really basic level. So if you're still new to Blender, this is actually going to be a really fun tutorial. It's all going to be set up in Eevee, as you can see here. So you can pretty much play it in real time. It's really cool, renders really fast. Now this is by no means a polished result. We're going to be using an Adobe Mixamo asset. You can see, there's some things going on here with the textures, and I've kept some of these things like these kind of like energy ball, meteorite, rock things, whatever you want to call them, pretty basic. So I still think that it still has a pretty cool result. I'm going to be showing you how to add this kind of like animation shake to the camera as well, which I think just really adds impact. And like I said, the whole thing is loopable. So I'll add in some chapter marks to keep things simple. And by the way, just if you guys want to check out some of my other content, I don't know if a lot of you noticed, but I am on Skillshare. You can see here, it's just a few examples of some of the courses that I have. So if you want to check that out, have 1 month free access, you can use my link in the description below. And it might actually be something that can really boost your skills in Blender. I've got a lot of sculpting and character stuff on there that's really helped out a lot of people. So I think I've said enough. Let's jump right in and have some fun. Okay, so first of all, we're going to want to download a model with some motion capture. So Adobe Mixamo is a free site. You don't even have to pay anything. It's completely free as a resource. I'll put a link to it in the description below. I have covered it in the past in a few of my videos. But what you're going to do is you're going to come here to the little search bar once you create an account and you sign in, if you don't already have one. And we're going to type in shield. Okay, so you type in shield, you're going to press enter. That's what I did, so you're going to wait. And it's going to be a whole bunch of results, usually with this sword dude here of the shield. You're going to scroll down, and the one I got was, it was quite distinctive. It was this one. It was the sword with the shield impact. Now you can kind of pick whichever one here you want, but having something where the dude or whatever, girl, whatever you're working with, leans in to the action is going to give you a really good result, because we kind of want that shield kind of punching forward, bracing for something. So I'm going to click on this one, sword and shield impact, and it's going to load it. And here you can see there should be a little example. Now what I'm going to do is just drag this little slider all the way down to -50 and drag this one forward. I think that makes it just a little bit longer. I never really mess around with this stuff too much, but you get the idea here. I think this is operating at a bit of a higher frame rate. But what we're going to do is we're going to click on download, and we're going to make sure that it is set to FBX. I think that is the default. It is for me anyway. And what you're going to do is you're going to take the frame rate, change it to 24 frames a second. That's the native frame rate in Blender. And then you're going to come here to, in fact, I think that's all we have to do. Then go ahead and click download. Okay, so it's done downloading the file. It's just an FBX. What I'm going to do with mine, just dragging it to my desktop, that's where I prefer to have it. And I'm just going to go ahead and run Blender. I'm still using Blender 3.2 at the moment. I know Blender 3.3 is out, but go ahead, once you're in there, go to File, and then go to Import, and then go to your FBX format and then find that. So for me, it's on my desktop. I'm going to go Import FBX. And you're going to see this little dude pops in here. And down here, if you pull this up, you're going to see there is the keyframes. So this armature here, if you click on it, you can see all those bones have these keyframes along here all the way to 38. But for me, what I did is I just selected the armature to make sure that's the keyframes I have. I selected all of this and I went Shift D to duplicate it, and I just dragged it all the way till the first of this duplication was on the last of the original selection. So right there on 38. And then I just came here to my end frame value and I just dragged it down till it's at the end. You can set it down by just 1 extra, so you don't get the stepping thing that sometimes happens. But just go ahead and press spacebar, see if it all looks okay. And if it all checks out, that's pretty good. So for me, this scale here is a little bit small. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go Shift A, just adding in a empty, and I'm going to add in a cube, scaling it down, and then taking the armature, not the actual character itself, if I can actually select it. And then while I'm holding in Shift, I'm going to click on this empty, Control P or Command P, and just go Object, Keep Transform. So now this is parented to that empty, and we're going to go S to scale that empty up to about here. And then let's just select the cube in the scene. We don't need it. We're just going to delete that. And here we have our dude set up. And if you go Z and you go Material Preview, you're going to see this has the material on it. We'll work on that a little bit later. Just make sure as you go to save. I'm going to save to my desktop. Actually give yours a name. I just left it untitled. I'm also going to quickly just enable my screencast keys so you guys can actually see the keys that I am pressing. And what we're going to do is set up a quick camera just so we have a field of view that looks nice and we can do our animation that way. That's at least how I prefer to work. So I'm going to press 1 to go into my front orthographic view, and I'm going to select this empty here. I'm going to go RZ -90 and press enter. Okay, that's the wrong way. I'm going to go RZ90, enter in the front orthographic view. So this guy is facing this way in the front orthographic view. Then I'm going to go Shift A, go down to my camera, add in a camera, and I'm just going to move it back here, G, Z, move it up. You can place your camera wherever you want. I'm just going to get rid of the original lamp and camera. And for me, it's somewhere right about around here. But what I did is I went to my camera settings and I took the focal length and I made it 120. And then I just zoomed back a little bit. The reason I like to do that is when I do add a focal element to my scene here, the background will be nice and soft, especially if this focal length is a lot higher. And that's kind of effect that I like, that nice shallow look. But I'm going to place my camera around about here. This is optional, but I went to my output settings. And to make things look a little bit more cinematic, I went here to the Y value and I made it 920. So it has a bit of a wider aspect ratio here. So 1920 by 920. And I also moved my camera up a little bit to the side here. So the character, the soldier guy here, is not exactly perfectly in the center of the camera. That just looks a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. You know, before we do the animation, we can even go in and just quickly add in a plane, just so we have a floor. I'm just going to roughly scale it up for now like that, but that's not the main point. We now have our soldier set up here. What I'm going to do now is show you guys how to set up a shield, how to make it and parent it to this system here. And we're going to be doing that in geometry nodes. So make sure to save before we go on to the next step. So we're currently in our camera view. Let's just press 1 on our number pad to go into front orthographic view. And just come to your first frame, just as a starting point. And what we're going to do is we're going to go Shift A, go to your mesh options, and you can add in a UV sphere. And I'm currently in the texture preview. I'm just going to go Z and just go into solid. And then you're going to take your sphere, you're going to go G and move it roughly up to where the shield is. Tab into edit mode and go R90 with all of that selected in your front orthographic view and press enter. So it's now rotated 90 degrees. Now the only reason it was able to do that without having to press Y, like RY90, is because I was in the front orthographic. So all of these should now be lined up this way. And if you press Z and you go into wireframe, you can select half of all of this, like so. You can go X and delete faces. Then press A to select all of this, S, X, and flatten it on the X like so to make a nice shield. And then go G, X, and move it back so that origin point is actually still close to this. And then we're going to just quickly give it a little bit of shape. So let's just click and drag just to select the back edge here. And we're going to enable our proportional editing. And we're just going to go S and just roll the proportional fall off down by rolling the middle mouse button and just kind of flay it out a little bit like that. I think that just adds a little bit cooler of an effect to me personally. But you guys can do it however you want. Maybe I'll just pull it back a little bit on the X. Back in edit mode, I might just turn off proportional editing, just select everything and just scale it up just a tad bit more, like so. And then I'm going to tab back out into object mode. And before we go any further, let's just quickly go Shift A and let's just add in an empty. Let's add in a cube, S to scale that down, G to move it up to where the soldier's, the knight here, where the arm sits. And I'm just going to place mine roughly just where that bone is on the shield. And then selecting the shield, I'm going to hold in Shift, select the empty, go Control P or Command P, Object, keep transforms. Now it's parented to that. Then I'm going to select the empty, holding in Shift. I'm going to select the armature, go into pose mode, and now click on that single bone over there and go Control P and then bone. Do a direct parent to the bone. Don't do any of these others, just bone. Then go back into object mode. And what you should see now if you press the spacebar is that all goes along. Now what you may be getting here is a little bit of intersection on the leg there, but that's not to worry. All you can do is simply drag through here to where there's a point where it all intersects. Select the empty here and this R to rotate it in the front view, just so you can kind of eliminate that. So that's a nice little trick. And that seems to work there. You can even animate that empty if you needed to, but I'm not going to do that. So now we have our shield. I do feel like this animation is a little bit fast, however. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause. I'm going to select the armature, and I'm going to go to my timeline here. And remember, we duplicated half of these over here. Just select them all the way to the halfway point. So that's about at, and for me, they were still highlighted, but I think that ended at about frame 37 or so. So I'm just going to delete those by pressing X and just go delete keyframes. So let me quickly just drag the end frame value down and see if that still looks loopable. Okay, that's still loopable. So I'm just going to drag this out to about frame 60 this time, the end frame value. I'm going to select all of these keyframes. I'm going to go to the very first keyframe with the slider. And then I'm just going to go S and I'm going to scale that up till the last keyframe is on frame 60. Now if you hit the spacebar, you can still get the same animation, but it's going to be slowed down just a little bit. I think that looks better now at this point. So there we have that. So I know that was a little bit of a detour, but let's just select our object here and let's just jump into geometry nodes. Go into your camera view here. And what we're going to do is with that shield selected, we're going to click here and we're going to go new. And it's going to add a geometry system here. If you go to your modifiers, you can see there it is. And the first thing I want to show you guys how to do is how to scatter some points on this geometry and then instance an object. So let's come over here, let's go Shift A and let's search and let's go instance. And let's get a instance on points selected and let's put it on this cable here. And now let's give it something to instance. We're going to go Shift A, we're going to search, we're going to type in Ico. Let's get an icosphere and let's plug that mesh into the instances socket. And now you can see we have them, but they're massive. So let's just come here to the radius. Let's make it 0.1. That's still quite big. Let's make it 0.01 for now. Okay, let's just leave it at that for now. We're going to randomize it in a little while anyway. In fact, let's just quickly do that. We're going to go Shift A, search, and let's just get a Voronoi. So we're going to type in VO and get a Voronoi texture. Put it over here. And we're going to take the distance and just plug it in to the scale. And now if you come here to the radius and make it 0.05 instead, you can see they're all a little bit random in size. I might make it 0.03 for now, right? So that's cool. We have these little spheres here. But the problem is we don't just want that. We still want to see an actual shield. So let's get that original geometry. Very simple way to do that is we're going to use this group input over here to bring it in. And we're going to go Shift A, search. We're going to get a join. We're going to get a join geometry. Bring it over here. And let's just place it on this cable here, where this instance on points is now going into. Let's just take that original geometry, which is the shield object we added in to our scene, plug it in there, and now the two are combined. How cool is that? Right, and if you press the spacebar, it all still works perfectly. And what we're going to do, we'll eventually add a transparent material to that. I'll show you how to do that in a bit. But there we have that. But one more thing that I think will look really cool is to add kind of like some sort of grid structure to this, like a wireframe. And at the moment that I'm not aware of any sort of wireframe node you can just drop in here and do it automatically. So we're going to do a little bit of a workaround, but I'll show you how to do that. So we're going to go Shift A, search, and we're going to get a curve, space 2, and we're going to get a curve to mesh. Put it up here, and let's take that geometry output from our original geometry, plug it into the curve, and just for now, let's just take this mesh and plug it into the geometry output so we can see what it looks like, right? So that's not doing anything because I actually got the wrong node here. Let's just quickly go Shift A, don't delete it because we're going to need that one. We're actually going to go Shift A, search, and type in mesh 2 and get a mesh to curve first. Place it over here at the front. So what's happening now is it's converting the mesh, which that is, to a actual curve object. And then over here, it's converting the curve to a mesh, right? But it's just a wireframe at the moment because we haven't given it a profile. So what you can do now is you can go Shift A, search, and you can type in curve and then circle, and you can get a curve circle, place it under the mesh to curve, and then take this curve here and plug it into the profile. And now that object here is setting a profile. All we have to do is come to the radius and make it 0.01. And that's a little bit too thick. Let's make it 0.008. Maybe even 0.005. You can try out different things here, but that now gives us a rough wireframe. And if you want to incorporate that, what you can do is come to this join geometry, Shift D to duplicate it, put it on this cable, and then plug this geometry from the other join geometry in there. And now all three of these are combined. So this system here, if we put it up, is our wireframe This system down here is putting our instances on here, our icosphere instances on the original geometry input. And then this one here in the middle is just our plain original input piece of geometry that we're going to add a transparent to. You could leave this as it is, but I think adding a triangulate to this will look really cool. So let's just come up here to the mesh to curve, and just in front of it, we're going to go Shift A, search. Let's type in try, and let's get a triangulate and place it in here and check that out. So there we have this now. The thing is, we do have to add materials to this, but if you just went now and added just like a material to this, and you went new, right? And let's just go down to the viewport display just so we can see it's applied. If you now went Z and you went rendered, whatever material you've added to this, it's not really what we don't want to work that way. What we want to do is we need to come in here and individually set that up for each one of these, which is actually really simple. But before we get into that, I think it's a little bit too early. Let's just quickly get our physics simulation, which by the way is really easy, and our camera animation out of the way. And when we're done with all of that, we'll jump back in here and that'll be part of our lighting and materials. But first of all, I think the simulation would be the better thing to do. So we're going to do that quickly. So let's quickly jump into our layout again. And what we're going to do is we're going to select our shield. And I'm just going to go Shift D to duplicate, right click to let go. And we now have, if we go under the empty drop down and under the armature and under the empty here, we have this duplication now, right? So if I go G, you can see there it is, separate object. It's still parented to that empty over here. But what we're going to do, we're going to go to our modifiers and we're going to get rid of that geonodes. With that duplication active, just tab into edit mode. And you can see here we have that. With all of that selected, we're going to go Alt S and just scale it out along the normals just slightly. And then we're going to tab back out into object mode. Let's go to our materials. Just get rid of the material. I just added that as an example earlier. But what we're going to do, we don't want to see this in the render. It's just going to be interacting with our objects, our rigid bodies. So we're going to go over to our object data properties. We're going to go to our visibility. We're going to turn off render, and we're going to also go to viewport display, and we're going to go over here to display as and make it wire. So we're going to just see a wire here in our scene, and when we eventually render this, that won't show up in the render. It's just an effector essentially. And if we press the spacebar, you can see it's all still parented to our soldier here. How cool is that? So let's now go over to frame 1. And let's make our little objects that are going to collide. You can use anything. You can get some pre-existing assets, but I like to go Shift A, just add in a cube, and just simply tab into edit mode, right click to subdivide it, and then under the subdivision tab, just give it about 3 subdivs. And with everything selected, going Shift Alt S and just smoothing it out into a ball, and then getting this proportional editing, and then just going G, and just giving it a rough kind of meteor shape, whatever. Another thing you can do is just go to your modifiers, give it a subdiv modifier, and also go and give it a displace. Go over to your texture properties, click a new, and then just give it a cloud. I think that works pretty well. Hop back over to your modifiers here, and let's actually scale this down. I want to go about this much. I'm going to go Control A and just apply that scale. Applying the scale is extremely important because we're going to be working with rigid bodies, and it does look at the scale of the object. And you can see it's changed things here a little bit, but we can come here to the strength and just bring it way down to about this much. And then we're going to go right click, shade smooth, and here we have our quick makeshift meteorite. In fact, there is a rocks option in Blender. We can add in extras, and it like has these rocks. I think they come pre-textured or something. Worth looking into that, but I'm gonna use this quick thing I whacked together here. And in my front orthographic view on frame 0, I'm just gonna go G, X, and move it back in the scene quite a bit. If you actually press N and you go to your properties under the item, you can see, in my case, that's about 23 meters away from the X location in the positive, right? From where our soldier is standing. And from this point here, at about the height of the shield, make sure it's not too high or too low. We want it to be on plane with that shield roughly. We're going to go I, and we're going to insert a location keyframe on frame 0. That's really important. And then we're going to go up to frame 13. Okay, this is really important. Or frame 12, about frame 12, frame 13. And then we're going to go G, X, and we're going to move it till it's about 7 meters away from our guy over here. and we're going to press I and insert a location keyframe. Okay, that's really important. By the way, just make sure to select these keyframes and then to press T and set it to linear, because we don't want it to be easing in and easing out. So what's happening, it's moving really quickly and then stopping. But what we're going to do at this point here, at frame 11, we're going to have this switch over to a rigid body simulation, and it's going to carry that momentum from the keyframes here. It's actually simpler to do than you think. So let's just quickly select this guy we've animated. Let's go over to our physics tab and let's give this a rigid body. We're going to leave it as active because it's a thing that's active. But pretty much now, if you were to go to frame 0 and play this, nothing's gonna, it's just gonna fall, because we need to actually let it know that at a certain point, we don't want it to run the physics sim, we want it to just animate. So how do we do that? We're gonna come to frame 12. And up until frame 12, we want our rigid body here, the animation, we want that to be on, all right? So on frame 12, click animate it and click this little button to add in a keyframe, and then just move up one frame. And then from that point onwards, we want this to be not an animated, but to have dynamic. So we're going to tick that off and click on here to add in a keyframe. So let's go to frame 0, and now let's press the spacebar and let's see what happens. See that? The dynamics now took over. Now, it obviously went through this thing here because we didn't add a property to this. So let's select this shield duplication. Let's go to our physics, give that a rigid body, and this one, you're just going to simply make that passive. You're going to go here to the shape and make it mesh. That's actually really important. And it's important that you enable animated for that one as well. So now if you go to frame 0 and you hit the spacebar, look at that. It's actually hitting our shield. How cool is that? Now you can also select the floor and you can give that a rigid body. You can make that passive. That you don't have to make animated, but it's super important that you come here and make that mesh. Otherwise it's gonna mess things up a little bit later on when we extrude parts of this up. But if we now go to frame 0 and you hit the spacebar again, it runs the simulation. There you can see it's hitting our shield and it's falling to the ground, right? And if you wanted to make this animation more aggressive, all you have to do, come to frame 0, where we had the first keyframe, just go G, X, move it back more, I, insert a location keyframe, and then from frame 0, hit the spacebar again, and there we go. It's a little bit more aggressive. But what if you want 2? Because in this case, you can see our animation. There's the first hit, and then quickly a second little hit. So all you have to do is reuse what you already have. Go to frame 0, go into the front orthographic view, and then take this rock here and go Shift D to duplicate it on frame 0, and then just move this one back a little bit and a little bit lower, and then press I and insert a location, okay? And then drag through here. And with this one, let's come to frame 12, and at frame 12, with this one, we're gonna take these two over here, these two keyframes for the duplication, and we're gonna go G, and we're just gonna move them a little bit further up to about 15. Now let's go to frame 0, hit the spacebar to run the simulation, and we can see that is a little bit too close. So we still have that second one selected. Let's just come and drag those two keyframes up even further. Go to frame 0, hit the spacebar, so hit. Okay, it's still not quite right, so let's keep trying. Let's go G, move it up even further, and from frame 0, let's hit the spacebar. Okay, so just keep moving those two keyframes up for the second duplicate, and going to frame 0 and hitting it, the animation, to see what happens. Okay, so that timing is almost right. Let's keep looking at it. Hit, hit. Okay, maybe just a little bit. You can always tweak it till you have it just perfect. It can be a little bit fiddly, but keep making sure you go to frame 0 and then hitting to run the simulation again, because it needs to run from the beginning. Okay, so that looks about right. I'll tweak it in a little bit, but you get the idea here. One thing I think I will do is with the second duplication, I will come here to 35, wherever it is, enable auto keying, and just go G and just move it up a little bit more. Okay, so it has a little bit more of a different point where it's hitting, like that. Okay, and if you look through your camera view, you should see this. Cool. So you can work on that, adjust that as much as you want. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to select the floor here. I'm going to tab into edit mode and go S, X, and scale it on the X a little bit. And I'm also going to disable proportional editing, then select these two vertices here. And I'm going to go G, Y, and move them back a bit in the scene. E to extrude, Z to bring it up. And then selecting this edge here and going Control B just to do a bevel, and then rolling the middle mouse button a few times, tabbing back out, right clicking and going Shade Smooth. And now we have a nice stage here. You can take this, scale it up as much as you want. Just make sure to go Control A and apply that scale when you're scaling it in the object mode, because our rigid body looks at the scale of things. So now let's have a look at that. Okay, you can see they kind of just disappear as the animation cuts out. You could run this a little bit longer or speed up how fast these things are going. In fact, you could even select the little rocks here. You can go to the physics and you can change the mass. You know, you can see if that makes any difference. You know, if they're heavier, they're gonna bounce a bit slower. If you make them maybe 0.5, you know, try out different settings here. That does seem to make a little bit of a difference, making them lighter. Let's make this 1.4. Go to the front, hit it again. Okay, nevertheless, this looks pretty cool. But so with our camera selected, let's just quickly give that an animation. Let's just go to frame 0, press I, and let's give that a location. And let's just go Shift D, selecting this keyframe, drag it to frame 60, so we have a loop. So it starts and ends the same way. And then about the first impact, right? So if we go to frame 0 and we hit the spacebar to run the simulation, I can see here the first impact happened at just about 15. So I'm going to enable the auto keying with the camera still active, and I'm going to go G and just slightly move the camera to add in a keyframe. And then just as it hits, we're going to have a little bit of a movement. We're going to go G and just move the camera this way a little bit. And then select the little cursor thing here, the little slider, drag it further up, and then go G and just move the camera forward a little bit. So what that's going to make it look like if we go to frame 0 is like a little bit of a hit on the camera. See that? Have a look at that. Okay, and you can space these out a little bit more to make it look a little bit more natural. Just play around with it. Just that little bit of movement, I think, really adds some impact to the animation. Like that, okay? And once you're happy with that, you can see roughly in the animation where the second impact happens. That's about here. So I'm going to select these 3 keyframes, go Shift D, and drag them up that way as well and see what happens. Okay, so you can mess around with the timing, dragging these around. Just make sure every time to go back to 0, because we haven't cached this, these rigid bodies yet. So anything you're changing now is going to affect these rigid bodies. So let's disable auto keying. And once you're happy with things, you can actually, if you want to render this out, you have to bake it. So make sure to save first of all. You can go to your scene properties under your rigid body world. You can go over here to the cache, and in this case, it's end frame value of 60. So let's change the end here to 60. And essentially that just means between frame 1 and frame 60, it's going to bake all of this in. So if we now go bake, those are now baked in. So it doesn't matter what we change here. We can change things, but those are going to stay the same way unless you come over here and delete the bake under the rigid body world properties there. But yeah, that is now our impact. So the next part we're going to do is add in some lighting, some materials, and make this look really cool, and then we're going to wrap it up. Okay, so because we're going to be rendering in Eevee, let's go first of all to our render settings. Let's go and make sure it's set to Eevee. Now by default it should be, so I'm going to leave it as it is. Let's enable ambient occlusion and also screen space reflections. And if you're working with anything refractive, which you will be, let's enable refraction as well under here in the drop down. So let's now start by adding in a quick light. So we're going to go Shift A, light, and let's add in an area light, and let's go G, R to rotate, just place it somewhere, just gives us a rough idea of what's going on. And with that light intensity, let's go to the power, make it 120, and let's increase the size. Okay, and then I'm going to go Shift D to duplicate, move one over here, rotate it in, just for now, just so we can see what we're doing. And what you're going to do as well is you're going to just select the actual character, go over to the material for that, and let's actually just go to the shading workspace real quick. It'll be a bit simpler. And in the camera view here, just press Z, go rendered, so you can see the rendered view. And then come over here to the normal strength, make it 0.1. And then come up here and get the metallic slider, drag it all the way up to about 0.6. And let's just actually grab one of these lights, just move it forward a bit and rotate it towards the character. Okay, that's a little bit better. So this is not by any means going to be very fancy. It's just making it look a little bit better than it was. I might bring the roughness down just a bit. Okay, this isn't really a materials tutorial. I'm just using what's already here, but that should be fine. Something like that. Maybe a little bit less than that strength. Just mess around with these, the roughness and the metallic till you think it feels right for you. But I'm going to go with something like that. I'm also just going to select the helmet, and for me, I'm just going to delete it. Okay, because I feel like it just looks better without it, but you guys can do what you want. And then what we're going to do is we're going to select the actual shield object. And let's just quickly come here to the shield object. We already added a quick example material earlier on. Let's just click on that. Let's just call it see-through. Okay, because it's going to be a see-through material. Let's just change it to kind of just like a whitish color. And let's come down. It already has a principled shader. Let's just come to the roughness, bring it down a bit. And let's take the transmission and take it all the way up to 1. Okay, so now we can see it's a see-through material, more or less. What we also need to do is, you see you can't see through it right now. Just scroll down and under your material settings, just go under settings and enable screen space refraction. So now you can actually see through it. Okay, so now we have that material created. Let's click on here to create another material. Let's say new. Let's just call this glow, and let's create another material. Let's go new. Let's just call this wire for the wireframe. And what you can do now is just get rid of all these three. They don't have to actually be on that shield. Let's go back to our GeoNodes workspace here. And now we're going to just come in here to our system, which I mentioned earlier, and add in the individuals. So let's look at the actual icospheres. We want to give them the glow material. So let's come here to the output, just before that join geometry for the instances. Shift A, search, let's just get a set and get a set material, place it on that cable, click on here and then get that glow. Now it's on there. Let's now go to the wireframe up here. Shift A, search, set, get a set material, place it on here, and let's get that wire. And let's just actually just duplicate. Shift D to duplicate that set material, place it over here in front of this output geometry. That's just the plain shield coming out of here. And let's just change that to see-through. Okay, so now if you press Z and we go rendered, we're going to see all of those materials on there. We still have to add the different effects to the glow and the wireframe, but it's all looking right. So now let's go over to our shading workspace. And let's also just quickly, with that shield, let's just quickly add our glow material and just add our wire, just so we can click on them and have access to them. So let's just start with the glow. All we're going to do is go Shift A, search, just type in E, get an emission, and then plug that into the surface, put the principled aside, and let's just change that to whatever color you want, really, and then increase the strength to whatever you like. So I'm going to go with something like 55, maybe even 75. That looks okay. If you go now to your render settings, by the way, you can also enable bloom, and you should see the glow on there, which is pretty cool. Only thing I'd recommend is that you dial down the radius a little bit on that. But that's looking great. Let's go back to our materials. Let's click on the wire, and the wire, I'm going to make mine kind of like a metallic blue and bring down the roughness a bit. You can do whatever you like to do, but that's what I did for my original. And what we can do now is select stage, go new. I would recommend you make it a darker material, maybe even a little tinge of brown. For my original, which I'll show you guys in a second, I used a rust kind of texture. It doesn't really matter. The focus needs to be here on our subject. And then you can go Shift A, and to get a nice effect, you can get some point lights and just place them behind the subject, just kind of towards the corners. And then you can get this nice kind of rim lighting effect, which I'm going to make blue in this case, and increase that radius and increase the strength a little bit. So if you now go Shift D and just duplicate that a few times, you can get this really cool effect where your subject really just pops out from the background. How cool is that? You could even change the colors on some of these a little bit for some aesthetically pleasing results. But I'm going to leave it at that for now. Let's just grab our little comets, meteorites, whatever, energy balls. You could really put a lot more effort into this. This is just for the tutorial's sake, but I'm going to go create a new material for that. Shift A, search, let's just get a noise texture, and we're going to go Shift A, search, type in E, get an emission, then take that color, plug it into there, take the emission, plug it into the surface, And if we now go Z rendered, we can see that's what we have. Let's just increase that brightness to 120 maybe. And let's take this noise, drag it over here, Shift A, search, get a color ramp, place it on here. And now we can tighten up these values, grab the white here and make it a nice kind of orange, like maybe a bit brighter than that, a bit more saturated. And you can drag this black value closer. You can come over here, mess around with the details, which I did, and the distortion. And the scale is completely up to you. Once you have something you like, you can actually grab the other one, come to the drop down and just give it that new material, right? By the way, let's just call that Glow Rocks. You could be more creative with your naming, but you get the idea here. So now you can see this is what we have. And when you go over to your Eevee render settings, you can take that radius amount and bring it down even more. I think that just looks a little bit nicer. And one more thing you can do is also come down and enable motion blur. I was doing that. Let's make it 0.7. What was I doing? That's weird. Okay, now we get more of an effect. You don't want to overdo it either, but you get the idea here. We have this now set up. Let's go back to our layout. And if you want to, you can go to output, select a folder somewhere in the computer, and change your file format to a video format, FFmpeg in this case. In coding, I would recommend you go with an MP4. Make sure to save, and then you can just go render and render out your animation. It shouldn't render too long since it's an Eevee, but the whole thing should also be loopable. Now make sure that you do, first of all, like I said, once you've changed anything here, just go to your scene properties, make sure to bake that if you haven't already baked it. If you want to redo the simulation and you change things, you have to delete the bake and then rerun things. But other than that, I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I'll quickly show you my original, which by the way will be up on Patreon. And I'll also mention that the assets we're using here by Adobe Mixamo, they are CC0, so you are allowed to use them for anything you want really. So here you can see this is my original. I added the same glow material just here to my sword, but what you see here is pretty much the same thing. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this. And by the way, just one more thing I think will help you guys. Let's just quickly go back to the one we made. Let's just add in a quick focal point. So let's add in a cube, empty. Place it here where our subject is. Then just select your camera. Go to your camera settings, enable depth of field, click on the little eyedropper, select that focus object, and then bring that f-stop value way down. And now your background should be nice and soft with the focus. That's going to add a little bit more to your render time, but I think it's worth it. You can go to your world settings as well, and you can actually go and give this a sky texture and change it to one of these here and just set it really low like that, just so you get a bit of environment lighting. But I would actually use a HDRI. That's my personal recommendation. But anyway, this has been a tutorial, and I'll see you guys next time for another one. And make sure to check out my Skillshare if you want to try that out free for a month. I've got a lot of really cool content on there. All in the description below.